Good evening, KZFR. Hope you all are having a good night tonight. This is Write.onair. Write.onair is made possible by the generous contributions of KZFR supporters and by Bidwell Presbyterian Church, celebrating their 50th year of loving Chico. Bidwell Presbyterian has a series of special events, including Fun Run Walk at Bidwell Park on September 8th, special worship services, plus an ice cream social September 9th, and a Chico history walk and prizes throughout September. For details, visit bidwellpress.org or call 343-1343. I think the dates might be a little bit off on that one, but visit their website, check them out there. So this is Write.onair, everyone, and this show is a show for writers. As I always like to say in the intro, this is the frame. You guys are the picture. You guys bring the whole show to life and let me keep doing what I do. So I am Kevin, your host, here with my co-host Nick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. And before I introduce our star for tonight, which I'm really excited to do, I have to touch on some stuff from a previous show. So we had a prompt submitted by Jan Matthews during the show, which was basically to have writers in the community or anyone who listens to the show write a topic or write with the prompt in mind of birthday cake. And we got a couple submissions, but not quite enough for its own show yet. So I might end up working those into the ends of some shows here and there. But either way, we need more submissions. So the prompt is going to stay open.
Can I just say how pregnant a prompt birthday cake is?
Yes.
Because there's so much you can do with birthday cake. The cake itself, coming out of a cake, what a cake represents, or how sort of precious and fragile it is among, running and screaming kids and stuff, and how much a birthday cake represents. There's a lot of material.
So please unpack that, and then... Oh, I think we're having technical difficulties here. Interesting. Well, we'll troubleshoot that as we go. Anyways, please do submit to that with that prompt, because that is, like Nick was saying, that is a wide topic for you. So tonight we have Sarah Pape. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So excited for this. So I want to go over your bio because it is a pretty hefty one, if I can say the least.
Okay.
So I'm gonna.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So you teach English. You're a managing editor at Watershed Review at Chico State. Your poetry and prose has been recently published or is upcoming in things such as the New England Review, Passages North, Ecotone, Crab Orchard Review, Bluestem, The Pinch, Smartish Pace, Hayden's Ferry Review, and others, which already is, that's blowing my mind. And you have what's called a chapbook, which we're going to come back to, called Ruination Atlas, and that was published by Dancing Girl Press. And you also curate community literary programming at the 1078 Gallery and are a member of the Squaw Valley community of writers. So if you want to read more about Sarah Pape, visit her website, sarahpape.com. Holy crud, you're famous.
Not quite, but thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
In my world of writers, you are like the top of the top. This is so cool to have you here tonight. And I'm so excited for your pieces because I did some preliminary reading and they were blowing my mind. So I'm going to have lots of questions and all sorts of stuff, but I am so excited for this. So I guess without waiting any longer, would you like to go ahead and unpack your first piece?
Sure. I'm not going to necessarily say anything about what the poem is quote-unquote about. I'm more interested in maybe talking a little bit about how they came to be and in a couple cases like the shape of them or the form that they're following. I am someone who writes to a prompt almost always. I never just write something out of thin air. So I was going to talk that through a little bit. So the first poem I was going to read was what they call a golden shovel. And basically it's a form created by Terrence Hayes in homage to Gwendolyn Brooks, where you take a short poem or piece of poem and each word of that line becomes the last word of your lines. So I'll read it and then I'll show you kind of what that looks like on the other side.
So excited for this one.
And this was also written at the Fairbanks Summer Arts Festival, where I teach for 2 weeks every summer in Fairbanks, Alaska. And this was a prompt given to me by Nicole Stellan O'Donnell. So shout out to Nicole. After a long time married, a golden shovel after Margaret Atwood. I wake to your face where you end. At first, some things fit riotously when drawn into another. No smear or haunt of me left to witness or answer back. Like barbed wire held tight to a limb, a tree, time and pressure hook metal to wood, wood into ceremonial singularity, an inexorable bond. As the eye makes meaning of light, a crack in the anniversary vase, a fish lives its remainder with the hook. Your body, your you-ness, is an invitation to harm, to open, the only tool to hold you, my eye.
Oh my goodness. Go ahead.
So the trick of that one is if you read down the right-hand margin of it, you'll read, you fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye. And that's a Margaret Atwood poem, a very short one, but it's a poem I've always admired, both for its surprise and brevity. And so as soon as she said, when Nicole said, hey, pick a poem or a short piece that you could kind of do this tricky writing into the end thing with, it was the first thing that came to mind. And I wrote probably the first 2/3 of that when I was in Alaska, but I kept troubling over the last parts, and it took me probably the better part of a year to figure it out. So it was like a little puzzle, you know, and it was fun to move words around and try to see, you know, and watch as the meaning started to change as each word added to or took away. So, yeah, that's that one.
Man, Nick, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, do you prefer the little ones that kind of keep you thinking about them and puzzling over them over a long period of time, or do you kind of prefer the ones that shoot out of you in like an evening, you know?
I guess I'm at a point in my writing life in which I assume everything I write is going to be worried over for the next year or two.
Right.
Nothing for me really comes right off the bat. Over time, I've realized, you know, the real work of writing or art in general is in the revision. So we get really excited about the new thing we wrote, but I don't really see anything as finished until it's kind of cured for a while, either in my drawer or in my revision pile, or, you know, usually it's when I'm about to send it out for submission that I revise it again, you know, so, you know, it's like that school adage, you know, nothing's ever done, it's just due. So I kind of think that, you know, most work can be kind of figured and refigured, sometimes into oblivion. So, you know, the trick is also knowing when to stop.
Man,
Powerful point, yeah.
I just want to take a moment. I've never heard of this writing style before, so when I was browsing through your pieces here, I had to go and look this up, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I mean, I'm open to pretty much anything that can come on the show because I want to see different styles and different techniques and all these things. So when something new falls on the show, it's beautiful. And this specific type, it so well binds what you want to have with the piece with what is being like, what's the word for it? What you're paying homage to. It marries them so well. And so reading this was just. It was blowing my mind. It was absolutely amazing. Like, oh.
That was the surprise of this piece, I guess, is I wasn't intentionally trying to write about marriage per se, but
yeah.
You know, I have a few yous that I always go back to whenever I write, and one of them inevitably is my husband, because we've been together for 20 plus years. So, you know, he's one of my muses, and I thought, oh, this Margaret Atwood's poem is pretty dire in terms of thinking about a relationship between her, the speaker of her poem, and the you there. But then it just started to kind of morph into, you know, talking about the inexorable bond, you know, the thing that brings two people together and stays and molds you to it. And I think it's actually a really beautiful part of long love, but it's can also be painful, you know, being so connected to another being.
I just want to let that sit for a second. It's so amazing. I also, well, we'll have to move on to the next one in a second because I want to get all your pieces in here because they're all so good. But I really wanted to point out the last couple lines because when I read pieces, I like to read them kind of cold as well to kind of hear and feel what listeners are feeling, what hits me. And the last 3 lines just like smacked me in the face. It was so beautiful. Your body, your you-ness, is an invitation to harm, to open, the only tool to hold you, my eye. And that's the last thing I want to say about that one because it's so good. Oh my gosh. Ugh. Okay, all right, I'll set you free. What's your next piece?
Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna go for the probably the darkest poem out of this collection that I gave you.
Okay.
I 3 times have been lucky enough to go to the Squaw Valley Community of Writers. It's a program during the summer where for a week you work with 5 kind of mentor poets, and every day everyone writes a new poem and you workshop it the next morning. So as you can imagine, everybody's heads are about to explode from the pressure of it and the idea that, oh my God, my poetry hero is going to read this first draft poem tomorrow. But what it does is it creates this really interesting pressurized situation where work that you probably never would have created otherwise comes through. So this was a poem that I wrote at Squaw Valley, and it was one of those nights where I was literally just like coughing up dust because I had felt like I had expended all my best mojo the days before. And so a friend and I were sitting at a table together, and I thought, you know, I'm just going to start looking for new words because a long time ago, Robert Haas came to Chico State to talk about poetry when he was the poet laureate of our country, and somebody asked him, what do you do when you run out of words? And he said, you know, go pick up a manual or a guidebook or some sort of book about something that you don't know, and see if that language kind of gives you something. So even though I grew up around fishing, I don't know all the kind of nomenclature for that particular
jargon.
Yeah, I don't know the words around fishing. So I started just making a list, and it just started to avail itself to the poem. And the title is Foul Hook, which it means when a fish is hooked somewhere on its body other than in its mouth. So that's where that title comes from. Foul Hook. He let me thread the eyelets, sort iridescent lures, slip sinkers and jerkbait, avocado boucle carpet and the chipped sill where I watched him slip through the fences. Yes, uncap the fluorescent marshmallows that are not for eating, wind monofilament and hold, for a moment, a minnow from the sieve-topped bucket. He has shown me how not to kill or touch eyes. He left before sun and returned long after with rainbows, black and bucket mouth woven on a simple strand. I would only recognize him now if he had 2 arms raised with gills open. He spilled guts into dirt, cats circling, clipping the fish's frond tail, scrape of scales and a dark stain on the tawny grass. Once, at the creek edge, he tasked me with gathering hellgrammites and damselfly nymphs, their ghosted forms under rock, faint pool of water forming as I revealed them. He stands slender on granite, casting out, reeling, the zip and gasp of Coors. He hooks me in the places his hands went wrong, and pulls the translucent strings tight, ties the fibers to a tow hitch, drives slowly away. How far will he go before they break, like some wild net, a severance?
Oh man, I like this piece so much too. Your writing has such a great job of making me feel like I'm putting on your glasses and looking exactly and seeing exactly what you're seeing. It just, it's like taking into like a bite into a pear, something that's just so full. And reading your stuff preliminarily, it's probably not the word I should have said, but it was wonderful because I actually have to go look up some of these words like Helgramites.
Right.
And so you having to go do the research yourself for the first time prompted me to go do the research too and continue it, which is such a cool idea of like making people learn while you're reading and stuff like that. But man, what's your take, Nik?
Well, I just wanted, if you don't mind, sort of unpacking of the lines. He hooks me in the places his hands went wrong and pulls the translucent strings tight. Because I feel like hooks me in the places his hands went wrong is the first time. The verb, the poem starts feeling really present, where everything's kind of a memory before that. And then that's kind of the fulcrum where the focus changes to the narrator. I don't want to assume it's you, but, the
Right.
narrator of the poem. Yeah.
I appreciate that. We have to train our students a lot of the time to say the speaker of the poem rather than this happened to you, which is
Exactly,
always
yeah.
the place that people want to go. And most of my poetry and my nonfiction, obviously, nonfiction is about, the true essential thing. So I am writing about my own life or my own experience most of the time. This, I guess, was when I first saw or read that definition, foul hook, it kind of opened up another way for me to think about the experience of sexual abuse. And, this poem is about my father, and that is an experience that I write about quite often. So it's not a surprise or shocker to share that here, but I find for me that when I read work about sexual abuse, neglect, abuse, all the different kind of big human experiences or anguishes, a lot of times people get really interested in kind of the gritty details of that experience. So my interest has always been in the resonance of that experience and how can you write about what it feels like after, what it feels like to survive something like that. And, in some ways what I'm saying here is it feels like there's still a hook in me and that it's just the fishing line stretches out and out and out and never breaks. And so, as a poet, I'm always trying to refigure the image to try and get as close as I can to the essential feeling of it. And for me, that metaphor availed something that I hadn't really thought about before.
It's just such a, to me, it was such a dramatic change in the tone of the poem, that line, and it's such a fresh way to bring up a subject that's often written about, but I've never heard it put that way. Hooks me in the places his hands went wrong. It's such a, there's a kind of a haunting simplicity to it. That's just, I thought it was really powerful.
Yeah, it
Good.
turns your head and makes you really go, whoa, and look at it. There's a totally different, like you said, turns on a dime right at that point, and it really makes you consider a lot of different feelings and different, everything is different
Absolutely.
after that point, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about this stuff for a long time, so I think in my early writing life, I was trying to kind of square off with some early life trauma, and it was very kind of flat-footed and bold-faced, but over time, I guess I start to see that the material of our life is what we're working with when we create art, and that doesn't necessarily mean this is what happened, but more like this is like the aura of an experience, or this is a resonant sound, or this is another way that I can get you to see the frame of this moment, and this is some of this poem, is from the experience of fishing with my father and being in places around Northern California and having to look for Helgramites and things like that. So those parts, are actual. But then, as the writer or poet, we get to invent past the actual, and that's where the art making comes in.
Yeah.
I just want to take that quote to, if I had to like put a stamp on the entire show, it'd be the material of our life is what we use to make art.
Yeah.
That was so well put. Man.
Thanks.
You're nodding your head there, Nik. I see you.
Yeah.
In agreement. Man.
I forgot you can't hear that over the radio.
Yeah. Just nod aggressively.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your next piece?
Let's see. So, funnily enough, I went to look at these in my notebook today to kind of see where these two poems that I'm going to read last came from. And they were both written, again, up in Fairbanks, Alaska, and they were both from prompts given by my friend and mentor, Jeannie Clark, who I teach up there with. And she, this particular summer, had been using quite a few poems by Mary Shibist, I believe is how you say her name. It's spelled Szybist is the last name. And so both of these poems just happened to be after her poems. So I didn't actually realize that when I chose them to give to you. But the one I want to read first is When We Were Very Happy. And this is after a poem by Mary Shibist called Happy Idea. And in the poem, she repeats the phrase, I had a happy idea, and then, something comes after that. And so we were tasked with writing a poem similarly. Not all the images in her poem are not necessarily happy ones, but it kind of challenges the idea of like, what is a happy idea, and it's not always rainbows and, heart eye emojis or whatever. So, so it started with me just making a catalog of things that were the color red. And so that's where this starts. When we were very happy. Red was patent leather and geranium blossom, mother's lips and satin camisole. Red burst along the levee, father holding the fire, knuckles split red with work blood. Cellular crimson in high heat, tomatoes sliced thick, salted, burst berries, 2 teeth marks along my rabbit's broken neck. Red, the uncorrectable, glamour-bound mimic of wellness, wound's signature, the calendar keeper. Patent leather buckles crossed over sky blue tights, cloud of tutu and too snug leotard skin. My feet were jewels crossing the dance floor, mirrored turn, a low whirl of dread. Red cheeks after crying, fireworks loud and close, sparks in the dry grass, reflected red in the bay.
Man, I wrote in my notes when I first, my first impression of this was, it was like captured moments or memories as they are remain most vivid, because that's what it feels like when I'm hitting this. It's just everything feels so succinct. Your writing is amazing. That's how I can boil that down to one thought for you. But wow, I love it.
I mean, in some ways, it was a challenge to try and think about red, the color red, in ways that are not cliche or overused or kind of recognizable already. So I started it by just thinking about kind of a catalog, and then, it turns, with my feet were jewels crossing the dance floor, it turns toward kind of a particular memory.
A narrative emerges.
Yeah. And, that's been an interesting thing. I think I used to write where I thought, okay, I'm going to sit down and write about this particular thing. But over time, it's morphed into a practice of letting the images guide the narrative. And so sometimes there isn't really a narrative. Sometimes it's just associative or, things that kind of refract off of other things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the title does the work. So it's, it's different every time I sit down to write a poem.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost a modernist poem, just all the fragmented visions connected together without an explanation of why they belong together necessarily, and other than the title itself. But yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you.
Okay, so we have only a few minutes left,
Okay.
unfortunately. So I know we wanted to ask a question at the end here, so I'll leave it up to you. Would you like to take the question now or read your last piece? Because that's the toss up there.
Could I read it and we don't discuss it and then you ask me a question?
I think that would be fantastic. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So this was the only happy poem I brought, so I kind of wanted to make sure to
Yeah,
get it in.
So we're not going to talk about it.
Yep.
Right, it's not worth talking about because it's happy. All right. We make ourselves new. Day after day passes in the exhale of cooled air, the first thought waking, hot, the last to leave you wakeful. At dusk, we ride bikes to the creek, ease ourselves into the water just cooler than our blood, slip slick from the other under the black cloth of water. Others' voices echo, their shapes make currents, and cigarette cherries glow. Yet it is always just us, our nightly baptism. We swim to each other and touch without fear of heat, but that which originates from tenderness. Thousands of nights ground to the finest dust, what's left on our legs and feet when we crawl from the slow flow of the dark pool, everything evaporating equally as we pedal the dark path toward home.
I'm sorry, our show is so short.
It's okay.
I want to point out one line, and then I'll let Nik
All right.
ask the question. I love the second stanza. The first thought, hot. The last to leave you wakeful. I put splendidly put because that's amazing. That's such a cool.
Yep.
Okay, enough said. I'll
Okay,
stop
enough said.
gushing. Go for it, Nik.
So my question is, you are the editor of a magazine. How do you feel about Instagram poetry and people's ability to post things immediately without having to go through traditional methods and having to go through editors and having to, be edited and, have that feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about what your own personal ambitions are. It could be simply that you just want the people you know to read your work and to understand something about you and your creative process, and I think that's wonderful. If you are trying to professionalize through publication or amp your way up to a book-length manuscript or a chapbook, I think trying to publish in traditional places benefits you greater. And it's not just because
Yeah.
you have an editor's eyes on the work, but it's because now you're in a community of writers that are also published there, and your name starts to get recognition. And then, once you have a certain amount of poems published, you can, start to send out a book. So, I mean, I think if you have professional ambitions, it does behoove you. That said, we did talk earlier about how, this is a time in which social media allows for shareability in a way that's never existed before.
Yeah.
Maggie Smith's book or poem, Good Bones, was shared over 3 million times, and it's still being shared probably daily. So, in that she was already a well-known poet, but it kind of launched her into this other stratosphere.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I do think, there's all sorts of ways that this can work, and in some ways technology is amplifying all of the mediums where we get
Yeah.
published.
Can I ask a really quick yes or no question?
Go for it,
just
go
to
for it.
just to cap it off. Do you think being told no and being told we're not going to publish you makes you a better poet? Do you think rejection is an important part to
Yes,
getting better?
I
Yeah.
absolutely believe that, rejection is helpful in all sorts of parts of our life, but it's a practice in my classes when students start to send their work out. If they get rejected, we all applaud and pat
That's
them on
great.
the back, because that means they tried, and
Yeah.
you have to continue to try.
Yeah, keep the energy
all
and the
for it.
momentum forward, right? Oh man, Sarah, thank you so much for being
Thank
on
you
the
so
show.
much.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back one day. This was amazing. Your pieces are phenomenal, and
Thank you.
this was just so cool.
Awesome.
So I guess I'll do the stuff that I do at the end of the show. So we'll go from there.
Okay.